This oral history interview of Marvin Barkis, former Speaker of the Kansas House of Representatives, is being conducted under the sponsorship of the Kansas Oral History Project Incorporated, a nonprofit corporation created for the purpose of establishing an archive of oral histories of Kansas state legislators who served prior to the year 2000. These interviews are funded in part by a grant from the Kansas Humanities Council. Professor Ed Flingy of Wichita State University is conducting this interview at the Kansas State House in the House Chambers in Topeka on October 27, 2017. The audio and video services are being provided by Chapman Center for Rural Studies at Kansas State University under the direction of Tom Parrish. Mr. Barkis practices law in Miami County, Kansas, and has offices in Lewisburg and Paola. He graduated from Ottawa University in 1965 and from Stanford University School of Law in 1968. He was first elected to the Kansas House of Representatives in 1978 and re-elected to 6 additional terms, serving from 1979 through 1992. He served as Minority Leader of the House from 1983 through 1990 and as Speaker of the House in the 1991 and 92 legislative sessions. Welcome, Mr. Barkis.
Thank you.
Is that reasonably accurate?
It is. It is.
Okay. Well, when did this all begin? Was there DNA in politics and elective office?
You know, in answer to that, I would, one quick answer is I grew up on a farm with, my dad was a farmer businessman, and at one point my grandfather ran for the Kansas House as a Democrat, and there were 2 Republicans who ran in Franklin County and ended up getting into a bad primary, and they were mad enough at each other. Oh, I got to stop. My grandfather died about 6 weeks before the election, and the local committee put my dad. Yeah, my dad's father died. Frank Barkis. My dad's name was Marvin, like mine, and Dad stepped in and had cards, and all he did is go to a few ice cream suppers, and then the election came, and lo and behold, for the first time ever, they had a Democrat senator from my district. So he was here like 51 to 55, I believe, and I came up here as a page at the Senate. He lived in the Kansas Hotel, and I thought this was the biggest place I'd ever been. I paged with one of the dockings. I came back from that. We've got home videos of me walking around the Capitol, looking at Abe Lincoln, talking about this and that. And
you would have been a teenager.
I would have been about the 8th grade or so, I think. I was born in 1943. So anyway, that was an experience that left me thinking I would like to be in politics, sort of. Now I grow up, I'm an officer in high school. I go to Ottawa University and I become president of the student body. And I would tell you that I've noticed in this process over the years that a lot of people who get here, like Miss Governor Brownback, were former presidents of their student bodies or student body officers. And so I didn't know that was training for this, but I think it perhaps was. To fill in a little bit the gaps of, I come to up here, I'm interested, but I'm in, first, my wife grew up in Turner. I knew her when she was 5 years old because her grandfather had a tractor business in Lewisburg, so I remember seeing her at church. Kay and I then went our separate ways. As the years go by, I go to Ottawa University. After I get out of high school, I go to Ottawa. I'm involved in a lot of things. My junior year, Kay shows up, and I'm very impressed with her. And
At Ottawa?
At Ottawa, and her grandmother had said, "There's the nicest boy in our church, and you ought to introduce yourself." So she was a go-getter and beautiful, and I was really impressed, but she wasn't so impressed, so that I had to go to Stanford Law School to better my credentials. That's what I tell her. She's very much on line with my political philosophy. We both got interested. When the year I got elected, I went to Stanford 3 years, and then I came back from there, and that's when I met my wife, and we started dating. And very shortly after that, we got engaged and got married. I worked as a legal aid storefront lawyer in 12th Street in Kansas City, Missouri for 2 years, and she worked in an all-black school in a program that the federal government called the Teacher Corps. So we had a really interesting, I knew the Black Panthers, the welfare rights mothers. I had stories. I could talk to you for hours about legal aid and being the only white guy in the pool hall and working with kids that had no fathers and things that just break your heart. I came out of there thinking, thank God I grew up on a farm in Kansas with 2 parents who loved me. I know how lucky I was. I also felt a strong commitment, and still do, to issues involving those kids. I have them in my mind today, and so legal aid happened. Kay and I had gotten married the fall of when I started the legal aid, 1968. I'd hitchhiked to New York after I didn't get drafted because I had a mononucleosis. They said, come back in 6 months. Well, I went to New York, and then I was going to go on a steamer, work my way around the world like Jack London. When I got thinking about it, I'm thinking, she's too good looking, she's too sharp, I got to do something. So I called her from New York, hitchhiked back home, got engaged the next week, we got married, went to do the legal aid teacher corps. Then, I think I told you earlier, I was, at the end of that 2 years, I came home and I said, Dad, guess what we're going to do? And he said, get a real job. And I said, oh, no, we're going to go to Africa. So we hit the road for about 11 months, then went to Europe, bought a $300 car, sold it in Marrakesh, went up to the Congo River as the only white people, hitchhiked through Uganda after Idi Amin took over. Basically, a great adventure with someone to share it with. That's a good thing I came home, best decision I made. And then after that, we went to Paola, Kansas. We started practicing law, and she taught school. Then we started having children, and we had 3 great children, and it's the best adventure of my life is having those, Ann, John, and Will. But at some point, Tom Lang, who will figure later in our discussion, shows up at Paola. He's working for Don Allegrucci, who was running for Congress. And so they want to get my support, and I met with Don and his wife in our home, and I decided if there are these kind of people in the Kansas legislature, maybe I ought to run for office. And that's really a factor in my running the first time, was that conversation. Now, earlier,
Your father was a Democrat.
I registered as a Republican. I worked for Wayne Angell, an economics professor at Ottawa University, when he ran for Congress. I worked with Dave Owen when he ran for lieutenant governor. My wife was the McGovern County chair. I was working for Dave Owen. After the election, I decided the Republican Party was going more extreme to the right, and I was not going to be comfortable in it, and I'm never going to run for anything anyway, so I changed parties. So like a lot of people, I'm a convert, and a convert is actually more serious than just somebody that falls into it. So I was a chosen, thoughtful Democrat, and I have never regretted it. It's been for me a very important part of my life. I feel like our party speaks for children. It speaks for those people in the shadows of life, the elderly, the needy. It's a party I'm proud to be involved in. I can tell you, all through the years of my political career, this interest in children's issues drove me to be here and to want to make differences. And
Through most of the 70s, you were practicing law,
Yes,
but then in 78, you decide to run. That's the first
yes.
elected
I've been a
office.
committee chairman, but I hadn't done anything else.
And are you saying that visit with Allegrucci?
Made a difference.
And,
You know what, it said maybe politicians can be serious people, and Don Allegrucci was a serious person and a good, smart guy. And so it turns out that I get here. First year, Carlin is governor. We take a train to Wichita. It's a great adventure. We're all happy. The place is great. What I don't know, though, is when I get here, the majority of Republicans are now back in control, and they're not going to give us a whole lot of input. So I found myself after the first year here thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to get to do anything, although I did make one. I learned about how to work in the minority, and you get a speaker lady to carry a bill that you're interested in that had to do with Lake Mary Center and in Miami County, a school, or it's not just a school, a place for exceptional children. So we got a few things done. The things that I would think affected me when I was thinking about this interview and talking about leadership is stuff that happened that first year. Now, somebody said, number one,
you're on the back bench.
I am over here somewhere in the back. I don't have much to do, and I'm sitting back there. But I listened to people, and one of the things they said, and you'll have to understand if you listen to me for a while, how hard it was for me to obey this rule. But they said, don't go to the microphone unless you've got something to say, because people get sick of the guys that go all the time. So I'm sitting there. I didn't go to the microphone the whole first year but once.
Who gave you that advice?
Some of the older Democrats and the other guys, like there were some real older ones that took me under their wing. They're from Wyandotte County, and they said they want to teach you the real lessons. One is you go early to the receptions because you always get the shrimp. And they were quite the good advisors, but I noticed that they got pretty comfortable kind of sitting there. Well, anyway, I'm trying to feel my way through that first year, and I found out, I mean, the first year, the biggest thing, probably the most serious debate I was ever involved with on the floor of the House was the death penalty issue that came up with. Carlin had said that he would sign it if it was passed. It was dead serious. I mean, I thought about it a whole lot, and Democrats, for the most part, they were going to back the governor's position. But the debate for 2 days was excellent. I mean, it was really excellent. I did not know till almost the last minute how I was going to vote. I ended up voting for the death penalty, and as a Democrat, that was not exactly what you would do if you're planning on going into it in the future, but I came down on the side of pure deterrence, and the argument I made was, somebody kills my kid, I want to know I don't have to do it in return. Society's got to avenge me. I don't believe in deterrence. What I believe is vengeance, and that's how I voted. Now, several.
And that was extremely controversial.
Yes.
During Carlin's
term.
term.
Definitely. So that wasn't as, I just did what I felt I should do, and through my times when I had issues come up like abortion, pro-choice, I took positions because you shouldn't be here if you don't want to accomplish anything or stand for anything. But on the death penalty, just as an aside, as time went by, I read articles, particularly on the state of Missouri, that every death case costs several $1 million. Now, I'm a kids advocate, and I'm thinking $2 million or $3 million to put a guy to death, it doesn't make good economic, practical sense. We ought to be spending that on children that don't become criminals. So at the last point, I supported making a hard 40, and making it so they're going to be in prison for their lives, basically. But then I didn't support the death penalty for the reason of economics, which had not been debated at the time we were talking about. It was the moral question or whatever.
Yeah.
At the one time I went to the microphone, and this will lead to some other thoughts I have about leadership, I went down there because I read an article in the Topeka Daily Journal about rats taste like chicken in the Soviet Gulag. It was about an American that got caught and sent out to the Gulag as an American citizen, and how anything you could find for protein was great. So I came down to the microphone and made what I would say is a patriotic speech saying, I'm proud to be a politician. I'm proud to be in a free country and be able to be here and in this body. So speech everybody stood up. And it was a good, rousing, patriotic, proud of it. And so that was it. And then towards the last few days, I found out we were having an award ceremony called Freshman of the Year. At that point, I called my wife and I said, they got cameras down here. They've got this thing is really, I don't know whether it's for real or not for real. So I ended up sitting there as they went through this guy's trip, the runner-up, and then another runner-up. And then I get to the last thing and I go, no way. And I got the Freshman of the Year award.
Freshman of the Year.
Yeah, you didn't know I could have used it in my political stuff. You didn't find that. Well, it's a spoof, and one of the guys previously got it, used it in his campaign material, so they made him swear that he wouldn't use, I had to swear I wouldn't use it in the campaign material. But I believe, my experience was, if you can laugh at yourself, if you can take this kind of experience, you become someone that people can see as a real person. And I have a good sense of humor, and I don't take myself too seriously about things. So that was kind of the beginning of maybe my leadership stuff. Then I carried the severance tax for Carlin on the floor. One of the old farmers says, you ought to look at leadership. Well, after being here for a while, I'm getting dang tired of being in the minority, and I'm thinking...
Fred Weaver is...
he was the minority leader, and I ran for the agenda chairman, which meant that I got it, and that meant that every day I was in charge of a half-hour meeting of Democrats, and I had to come down to the floor and announce there's going to be a Democrat agenda meeting tomorrow in the old Supreme Court room, which I usually use the opportunity to tell a joke or get, for one time there was a whole airplane load of marijuana out of Dodge City, and they found it, and then they decided they had to do something with it, so they burned it, and in the evening, the smoke and the flames attracted the terns, and they'd flying around, so by evening there wasn't a tern left unstoned. That's the kind, they'd go a polite smile or, oh gosh.
Well,
and let me go one other thing about that. That got me in front of the group all the time. When I got the job, the previous guy read every bill, discussed everything. I created a one-page thing that I gave to every minority leader. Their job was to report on the bill. I didn't have to read any bills if I didn't want to, but Bill Ridden would do education, so they all participated. And one of the things I did from very early on and had thoughts about, if I ever become a leader, I want to share the power. So, agenda chairman, we could talk about other bills we did, but during that period of time, Fred Weaver decided to not run. I ran against a guy named Don Maney. He was the assistant minority leader. It was his job to be had. I beat him, 2-1. Rebels, freshmen. Hardest campaign I ever did in my life was asking these people to vote for me. It was very personal. So now I got the job. Tom Lang, now I hire Tom Lang to be my administrative assistant, which he was till I was no longer speaker, except 1 year when he ran docking campaign. I can't tell you how I see the way this process works. I think the staff I had and the staff that worked in other offices are probably as important, and if you want to do a real history of how the legislative process goes, you really ought to be talking to people who were staff members because they did it. They carried the water. I mean, and what I found out about having a quality first-class staff was they made me a better person. They made me a better leader. I felt like I couldn't let them down, so I found myself probably better. And I really couldn't say enough good things about my staff.
So Tom Lang was with you those 8 years, pretty much,
All but one,
and while you were minority leader.
yes.
I didn't realize it.
And Tom is one of the smartest, honest guys you ever could ask for. And I was going to mention, I had Tom, I had Jolene Grable, I had Mary Eisenhower, Tony Ruiz, Kim Garrity, Bob Wooten, Joe Scranton, Tony Wheeler, Ed McKechnie. I mean, those all people were working in and around it. And that's not even all the people that were there, but I always had good staff. They made me. But the other thing I always believed in is I got into leadership, and when I became minority leader, the rule in the days of old was if you backed the wrong candidate for the leadership, you're not going to go to Washington on a junket anymore. You lost your free trips and the good stuff, or maybe your committee assignments. I got the leadership team into my office, and we began to debate different things. And I said, one thing I think I want to do is I want to take the National Conference of State Legislature trips, we're going to divide them into halves. People that never had any trips ever get a half. People that have had the trips all the time get a half. So we'll share over the next 2 years those deals. I did not punish the losers. One of the things I think made my leadership as strong as it was is I built a community. We didn't play traditional hardball politics. The result was, before long, all the other guys' supporters are now supporting me because I've treated them fair and ever dreamed they were going to be fair. That the people who got me elected are in that. They were in that leadership team.
Were you ever challenged?
No, not after that. But I got that, and I think I built community, and it made a heck of a lot of difference when you're in the minority. You know, the past you'd split on issues, and some would go with, you know, I had to hold the group, but when you have a group that's participating, when I appoint Kathleen as chairman of the Fed and State, and I appoint Joan Wagner to tax, and I appoint Bruce Larkin and Rick Bowden and on and on. I had great committee chairman. I really did, as I got, to be the speaker. And
talk about the politics of that time. I remember Marvin as kind of a partisan guy.
You know what we did? We believed in stuff, and we roll call votes all the time. We used the minority to try to create a record on things that we cared about, and being partisan. So one of the things that's real easy to do is to go down the line, keep your head down, and just keep coming back here and never get anything done. We wanted to accomplish stuff. So over the time that Mike Hayden was governor, and I had a good relationship with Mike, still would if I was around him. He and I both came out of farm backgrounds, so we had a lot of common things. But we really had a period of time, the 2 years when he was governor and Jim Braden was speaker. Jim Braden had his hands full because of the divisions inside of his own party. That was that early time when there's 10 or 12 or 15 early, what they called them, the rebels, Kerry Patrick and a whole lot of representatives. I mean, Jim Braden got to we had one point when we changed the rules without talking to the speaker about it. These guys offered us a deal, and we opened the rules, so it was a lot harder for them to keep a bill tied up in committee, and basically liberalized and took some power away from the speaker. We could have gone further. But I think Jim got to where he really didn't have the power. And I don't think Mike Hayden I really don't know that he understood what Braden's problems were, because Braden, he'd been speaker and he knew how he got things done. He didn't have the problem that Jim Braden had, because these guys come up here, they're freshmen, and they are radical. I mean, they want to cut government across the board. They want to, they're still around in the national level. They're still around here, but they were the first. I mean, it was an unusual time, and they really were not well liked, I can tell you. But we also had times when my preference would have been not to make deals with those guys, because philosophically we don't have anything in common. And occasionally we could make deals with moderate Republic on specific issues, but we didn't have a coalition of the moderates and us. We had a coalition somewhat of the radicals and us on some issues. The result of that was it was dang difficult for Mike to address reappraisal and classification issues. He had his hands full because of this coming of age of conservative kind of radicals. Yeah. I think that was a real disappointment for him, and maybe he didn't always understand it. But Braden got a lot of criticism for things that wasn't really his fault exactly. I mean, I can tell you he was so nervous about all this that he'd call me to see whether we were going to change the rules that day or not. Can I go to Washington and not have anything happen? And I basically felt like I kind of had the power of a little bit more than a minority leader should. And somewhere in the process, I think that there were discussions that I could have maybe become speaker by making a deal with these guys. We'd had the votes. But I'd had to give up power, and I didn't want the job. I said, I don't think I'll ever be Speaker of the House. I'd like to be, but I am not going to do it if I can't be a speaker for the issues I care about. So that never happened. Then lo and behold, the next year we run an election and we win by one vote.
Well, I did looked at the gains. In the 86 election, you would have been in your maybe fourth term as
78, 80, 80, yeah.
You gained 2 seats. The Democrats gained 2 seats. In 88, 7 seats were gained. And then in 95 seats. Were you involved, I mean, how much as minority leader were you involved in recruiting and trying to get folks elected? Was that
Keep
part
in
of
mind,
how you saw?
I did not like not being able to get things done. And being in a minority, you really don't have too much power. So what do you do about that? You go home and quit? Or do you work on recruitment of good candidates? We got very sophisticated. We made deals with the Republicans. They wanted some things and we wanted some things, so we all got computers to do reapportionment. So we ended up with a very rational reapportionment, kind of a balanced reapportionment. I spent hours of my life in the summer and the fall recruiting candidates on the phone or meeting people. I believe we recruited George Teagarden kind of candidates, people who in their districts were quality people who they voted for them even though they were a Democrat. So what I ended up with, because of how it really worked, when we ended up with our minority increase, a little more power, somebody over here is going to side in with us on some issues, we can block on some, we had a lot of progressive ideas. We got within sight, and we could then get, as we did that, we got some of the old timers to vote as part of the group because they'd been voting to keep their head down, and maybe they'd vote anti-union on something, or they'd basically not stick with us.
Of your party.
Yeah. So I would call somebody up, and I can remember calling Sheila Hockhauser as a woman that's Jewish, going to run in Manhattan, Kansas. Can't happen. It did happen. She won, and a teacher out there won, and nobody had ever, one of those had never had a Democrat. And Stevie Stevens, who was hippie kind of gal who lived up in Leavenworth and was all about Wolf Creek and fighting Wolf Creek. And I could talk about the nuclear stuff because I found out pretty quick that the business community, like the people that run Wolf Creek, thought that we were just kind of a courtesy call until they found out they didn't have the votes without us. And but I was good at it. Tom was good at it. We worked with people. The legislators worked for people.
Did he do a lot of field work at that time?
No, he didn't really, but he just, if somebody had called and wanted to know about how the process works, but I did a lot of it. The party did it. I mean, getting good candidates is really difficult, and if you looked at the political, there were a lot of years when the Democrats didn't field anybody in Johnson County, and then by the time we were doing this, and we could see that last period, we're within 5 votes. If the right things happen, we might get the majority. That year, that election, there were 10 House seats within 100 votes.
You're talking about 90?
In 90. Rick Bowden lost and then got it back because they miscounted. Lane Wells lost and then got it back because it was like a few votes. We came to the floor with several elections still in contest. We end up with one margin, 63 to 62. But we had it. We didn't cheat on, we didn't use power on usually, because we wouldn't have to have those hearings, and we had the votes to have stopped it. So now I'm amazed that I'm speaker. Yeah, sure.
That election. You've described the House, getting the House majority by 1 vote. A former governor is beaten by Finney. Mike Hayden, the incumbent governor, is beaten by Finney. So you start in 91, the 3rd time in state history, Democrats have a majority. You have a governor who has no legislative background. How's this work?
Well, I wasn't sure, but when she made it clear she was going to veto ever budget appropriations if she didn't get initiative and referendum passed, I knew we had some problems. I mean, you're dealing with a person who got elected as a populist, who had lots of strength around it. I mean, we always assumed that was going to be, if Mike lost, it was going to be to Jim Slattery or Dan Glickman and not Joan Finney. She was way underestimated, but she was a person of the people. If she came to a meeting in Paola, Kansas, when she was treasurer, she'd know everybody in the kitchen. She remembered names. She had a good heart. She was all about getting the initiative and referendum and using sales tax. She wanted to take care of all the loopholes. So you had $700 or $800 million of potential tax money to deal with school finance issues. And so I'm now used to working with a governor like Carlin. Everybody down in there was knowledgeable. They had broken down into the ag deal and the kids' issues and economic issues. Now we got all new people. The governor's daughter became her assistant, and nobody there really knew the nuances of the political system. So for me, I think, okay, we're going to help her. But then some of the ideas kept getting kind of to the point that I think Bob Miller and I both decided that we're going to have to quit playing politics.
Bob Miller is now
He's a minority leader, but he's a solid guy and conservative, but not radical in any way, shape, or form. He's thoughtful. He's out there on the tractor thinking like farmers do, and I found him to be a solid guy. And we really ended up, by the end of the session, we didn't just pass hard stuff. We passed hard stuff with veto proof. I mean, we did school finance, which there's a story on school finance because the governor vetoes a bill that I fought really hard to get out of the House and the Senate. Yeah, in the 91.
Yeah.
She vetoes it. I think, well, maybe the teachers and other people can get somebody to change their vote. We only needed a very few votes to override her, so I called an override session to override our own governor. It didn't work, and it was the longest session, I think, up to that time, but I felt like we owed it to the kids in Kansas and the people I came up here to be helping, which teachers and education, because I think capital investment in children and people is way better than infrastructure investments and all the rest of it, because I believe that really can change the future. So I'm not too sure that it was very well thought of at that point in time downstairs, but we did it. So that's school finances sitting in court. One of the things we did, and I think it was useful, was get her to have a special commission appointed. And it was staffed some. She appointed a lot of the members. Judge Bullock gave us another session to try to get it done. Nobody, almost in any legislature in America, did a major school finance rewrite unless the court wrote it for them. I mean, legislators didn't want to mess with the heat of this kind of stuff. It's going to cost money, taxes, it's going to change the money that goes to southeast Kansas and whatever. It's a tough nut. So after that summer, they reported back a potential school finance thing, and we had hearings, and I guarantee you that issue was tough, and they went back and forth between us and the Senate. And I owe a lot of things to Don Crumbaker. Was an old, honorable, good guy that had been in education forever, and he really got along with our leader, Rick Bowden. And so I knew that, but I also knew one other thing. Expertise counts. And one of the guys that I consider a friend and one of the smartest, best guys in Kansas is Dale Dennis. The Republicans trusted him. We trusted him. When the House, towards the end of the session, came up with a school finance proposal, ours, Dale was helping us. We had him as a resource, and we had meetings back there, and I'm sitting there with people from Johnson County who can't hardly stand what we're doing because they're going to maybe lose their elections. I've got Western Kansas people, small schools, but I'd traveled around the state when I was working on my children's committee stuff, and I saw hungry kids and talked to people, and I knew we had to do something on school finance because it did something for kids. It did something for education, and it did something for property tax relief because we raised an income tax and a little sales. And by the time we got through, our tax system was progressive and balanced more than it had been ever. So our House proposal that went back to the Senate, back and forth, when it left the House, it left veto-proof. We had more votes at the final vote on that than we needed. If Governor Finney couldn't override it, she had some ideas, but she couldn't do it.
Now, you're talking about 92.
Yes. Yeah, I slipped over into 92. But see, the first year we tried it and it failed. Classification failed. Okay, the second year we succeeded. And when you list all the things that we did reapportionment, we did school finance, we did classification, we did the one that I probably hold the most dear to my heart was in the summer after the first year. I got the legislative council, coordinating council, to let me have a children's initiatives committee.
Let me come back to that.
All right.
That's worth
It's one of my favorite
talking
topics.
about separately. You know, when I review the history of this, I've kind of bowled over based on my reading of the history. I mean, at the start of that 92 session, you got a 1-vote majority. you know, not an overwhelming, and probably a few Democrats are not going to go along with some of this.
On a given day, we had at least one guy that we never, any of us knew whether he was going to vote with us or the Republicans or not vote. He was
But
just,
you didn't wait for anybody. You folks, we're going to do this. Where'd it come from?
it came from building the coalition with the moderate. My theory on politics in Kansas is we traditionally had good government. The splits were urban rural, but we had good, solid people making good, solid, middle-of-the-road government. We supported schools, we supported mental hospitals, we were a progressive, moderate state early in our history, all the way through, really. I mean, it was a state to be proud of. I mean, Meningers did stuff I felt like when I was thinking about being a Republican, it was a good party doing good things then. But when we have this situation evolve where we begin to work to know that the governor might veto whatever if we just pass it with a few votes, it's going to be vetoed. So what do? We make strong coalition decisions. I mean, I didn't get it done just because it was Democrats. I got it done because there's a whole lot of Republicans who wanted school finance and wanted tax things done, and some of them hide out from the income tax thing and vote against it. But we had on almost all the big items you would have read. We were after the first year when she vetoed stuff for no real reason that we could figure out. I think Bob Miller and the guys around him decided we're not going to play politics in that second year. They decided we're going to prove that democracy is strong and redundant and can get by with someone who's in the middle who doesn't fully understand it. We have to move up and make things that are good for Kansans that they can live with, because none of what I did was an extreme Democrat position. It was to the middle, and I'm proud of that, and I was proud of the Republicans that helped me. I mean, I have thought since I got to this place, we have better people representing Kansans than Kansans I realized, and that was on both sides of the aisle.
But that school finance, $350 million in new taxes, income and sales. You got one vote.
I didn't, but I had all those Republican votes.
Yeah.
We didn't make a Democrat deal and shove it through. We made a deal for Kansas, like conference committees sometimes do, between the House and the Senate. You know, when you bring a bill out of the House for school finance and it's got more than a veto number of votes, what's the Senate going to do? They're going to think, well, maybe we ought to take this as a pretty good work product. We had some input. I mean, we all had input, and probably we had political shelter from me being the speaker to do some stuff. And it wasn't a partisan year. In my opinion, it was, we're going to settle down and make it work like we all kind of would like to have it work for real. But with governors, one thing I also know is governors have the only job in Kansas that I would have loved to have had, because you can set the future. You can deal with the future, because otherwise democracy is a reaction to crisis. Wait till the water's brown in western Kansas, then we'll get a water program. Governor can get into it. Tax balance and fairness, children's stuff, you name it, a good governor. You will look around the country even now, and the governors get to speak for the future.
Setting.
They are agenda setting, and I think for 2 years, because of the peculiar situation, I got to function, the House did, a lot like a governor functions, in terms of following things, wanting things, getting done.
I was going to say, the governor wasn't setting the agenda.
No, the governor was hands off, right from the press said. Governor
Well,
Fenty's
she's
hands off.
vetoing.
But I sit here and watch Democrats grinning, voting to override vetoes because she didn't talk to us about them, and we didn't know they were coming, and we didn't know why they came, and that was just the way it was. The governor got I think she probably learned that she had to deal with us when initiative and referendum got killed. And we passed it, but we didn't pass it with enough votes to put it. And the Republicans coalition we had didn't vote for it much. And it was designed to be somewhat reasonable if you have to have one.
Mid-March, the House passes over to the Senate. And I again went through some review of this. They defeated school finance one time, second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time.
But then about then, we came up with our own House proposal.
No, you'd already sent it over.
I think maybe we revamped it. I was looking at it.
But that's after conference committee and so forth. My point is, you're sitting over there looking across the chamber, looking across the Capitol, and they're struggling. Fred Kerr, Bud Burke,
Fred's brother.
The education senior.
Harder.
Joe Harder. And then they finally do pass it on the sixth try. I mean, they actually voted it down that many times and then brought it back.
And in preparation for this, I read Mark Tallman's essay or paper he did on the school finance issue, and it read like a good book to me because I had never really understood exactly all the stuff that was going on, but it was really excellent.
My notes are from Tallman's paper on this, and because I certainly wasn't. But they finally got something passed on the sixth try and got it in the conference committee, and so then you're in conference negotiating back and forth. And I think the reference you made, you got a vote of 91 to 43 in the House.
Pretty incredible, wasn't it?
The Senate did not have that kind of a margin, but
I bet reapportionment passed by that.
One of the things that's in that paper that, and I'm going to quote, "We have a proposal we believe is a winner. This proposal meets the needs of our children and the constitutional responsibilities of the state and provides the greatest property tax reductions ever." That's
pretty good.
Marvin Barkis.
Well, but it was absolutely true. Yeah. And I think it was because we took everybody's input. We got voters to vote with us on our side that could not bring themselves hard. I mean, I think we lost a few. Johnson County would have been very difficult. But this was good for small schools in almost anywhere in Kansas. It was fair. And when you go to schools that don't have air conditioning and don't have decent buildings and don't have anything, and you're in Miami County next to Johnson County, and you see what they do with the mill levy, are the kids there more important than the kids in the rest of the state? And my goal from the very beginning was, I agree with our Constitution. We, at the state level, have responsibility for educating all the kids of Kansas. And when it gets out of line, as it got, John Kozol was the guy who wrote a book called Savage Inequities. And I mean, he basically said, when you damage a kid in school by not giving them resources, you're damaging a kid for life. You don't get a second chance. And I like the quotes from the guys that talk about, kids are the messages we send to the future. Bill Clinton says at a speech in Wichita, if we don't take care of the next generation, if we ever get to where people believe that the next generation isn't going to do as good as we are, we're going to fail as a society. And I believe that stuff. I absolutely am devastated by the directions we go in our country right now.
Now, you can't remove yourself from all this experience, but if you try to stand back, how were you conducting yourself as speaker? I mean, how did you see you mentioned agenda setting because the House Democrats were out front with this.
Some of these issues we had to deal with. They were forced on us.
Yeah, it was.
But the issues that some of us really cared about, got wrapped up in the children's stuff that we ought to talk about before this is over. And when I look back on it, I think my strengths and my personality, sometimes they're not understood, but I basically got elected because I could talk to the normal guys in our caucus, because I didn't take myself too seriously, but I am a serious person. And sometimes by sharing leadership, people get invested and they form community and they form a sense of they're all in it together. And we could have urban and rural guys split on issues, but still get together. Bill Reardon and I, for example, are absolutely opposed on two sides of the pro-choice or of the abortion issue. He's Catholic, and so I look at it and think, on every issue I really care about, Bill's there. He and I don't agree on this issue, but we're going to work together to get better for kids, less abortions, you name it. I was all about trying to feed hungry kids and do something after they're here. It's one of the things that used to bother me was people could vote on the abortion issue and then not vote for feeding pregnant women and infant children programs and prenatal programs. And I'm all about, they're here, whoever makes the decision, that's up to your philosophy or religion, but they're here, we got to take care of them. They got to have a good school. They got to have a school breakfast. So I'm kind of on some things I went to Wichita and spoke at several times on pro-choice issues. I took an issue. I got probably beat on some of that, but you know what? I didn't want to come to Kansas and be up here and not stand for anything other than getting reelected or taking money back to my district. I was proud of the Democrats when we fought in the minority. We didn't fight for the stuff to take it home or line us up for a job. What I think we fought for was we got more money in the budget. If we're going to vote for a sales tax increase to do what needs to be done, we're going to fight for this generally kid stuff.
In 91, Finney, the governor, vetoes this stuff. And you said you couldn't override her.
I tried.
She turns around and supports this in 92. How did that happen?
Because she had a chance, somehow was convinced to create her special blue ribbon commission on school finance in the summer.
So
she got to appoint people to it. Then she began to have ownership of what came out of that committee, and therefore she wasn't just initially upset about it. And that's the base on which we started the session with school finance, was the results of the committee. And who was on the committee? Don Crumbaker. It was our people kind of who felt like I would have felt, but I wasn't on it. It wasn't I didn't need an appointment. Sure.
If a district court judge today would assemble in the Supreme Court chambers legislative leaders, the governor, and say, get this done, it would be viewed as really aggressive. How did you, District Court Judge Bullock called literally all of state government over and said, get it done, it's your responsibility.
I actually don't know why he did it, but I know that when we called the veto session and when we passed that legislation, it was darn close to what he would have expected to have the legislature do if it was doing what its job was. And I think he realized, give them another shot. They got one more year with the current people in place. The governor's invested in this project differently because she set up the committee that was reporting this program. And he gave us the chance, because the courts have done it everywhere, because legislatures, to me, it was probably one of the hallmark things we did as a legislature in Kansas. We actually did it without the court dictating it. And it was quite an achievement. And again, it wasn't, I'm not sure I could tell you the nuances of school finance, but when I believed in leadership, you delegate When you have a Joan Wagner on the tax committee and you have a Rick Bowden in the education committee, I don't have to know. I can get them all in a room and say, let's get this thing figured out and we'll do something, bring me back something on education. I'm real good at puzzle solving, but I'm also good at getting people to help me be successful. So I felt like all my career, I've always known having a smart wife has been one of the smartest things I've done. I always know that we had a lot of really outstanding women as well as men in our legislature, and nobody was really playing politics. We're trying to solve a real hard puzzle, and I think I owe as much to Bob Miller and the Senate leadership, because they didn't treat this as the Democrats trying to make something. It was a serious problem. If we came up here as serious people, we'd solve this problem. And I think probably most of the people who were here that period of time will tell you it was one of their proudest sessions that they were in, because another thing I did not penalize Republicans. When I got to be Speaker, they had a lot of the time, they were in the committee of the whole chairing it, not me. And I felt like we bargained at all kinds of levels. And basically, if you read the papers from those days, the rebels found themselves basically floating with no power, no nothing, because you know what? We made a coalition with the people who shared our values, and that really is a solid coalition.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest tribute to what you did on school finance, not you, but
The legislature.
legislature, they're still working with that today, trying to, rework it a bit, and they've got to deal with other issues, but the framework put in place in '92 is still, Brownback tried to trash it. He did trash it and suspended it, but it wouldn't go away when they had to fix it.
Well, guess what? Courts are supposed to be a separate part of government, and they're supposed to keep a watch on us, and sometimes they have to do their job and not be scared to stand up. To me, they're real.
And we shift to the children's initiatives, and I read a paper on this that said Marvin Barkis, House Minority Leader, and Robert Miller, House Majority Leader, attended an NCSL session in 1990 on the threats to neglected and abused children. Does that ring a bell with you at all?
I think it's I've got one thing I want to find that. This is a blueprint on Kansas children, and we handed those out all over the state. And in this blueprint, it summarized kind of like a plan for the future. We had targets for change. We had strategies for the state, strategies for communities, strategies for business and schools. I had always been a children's advocate, but Bob and I had gone to, I believe, I don't remember whether we were both at the same place, but there was a meeting in DC. A guy spoke that was a Chamber of Commerce fellow, and he talked about how the businesses should invest in children because they become their workers, and there's ever good economic reason. And then he went on to talk about prenatal care. Early childhood investment is dramatically economical. We don't have to deal with blind children. We don't have to deal with a lot of disabilities if the mother eats good, if we have resources devoted. And when you're learning, a lot of the learning occurs before you're old enough to be in school, so we already are messing up by not getting in early. And the guy it dawned on me listening to him, that's exactly what our group of people were always dealing with. There were a lot of legislators here that like kids' issues. So that's after that I came back, got authorization for us to have the committee, and Bob and I chaired it.
And that's over the interim of
91, 92. And so I had the guy from Security Benefit Life president. We had an officer from Sprint, from John Moore, who went on to be lieutenant governor later on, was on that committee. We met, we had a few senators, mostly House members and the business guys, and by the end of the time, we made recommendations that end up being in about 18 different bills. We went from having a children's budget to mandating school breakfasts and on, and we put more money in school budgets that year, and almost, I think, 15 of those bills passed. They were revolutionary. We created a corporation for change that would be useful to, we knew we weren't going to be here. We weren't pretty sure we wouldn't even be in the majority, but we tried to leave behind us the institutions like Corporation for Change that would look at ways to change schools in the future and help kids. We thought the school finance was right on target because it lowered property taxes, but it also helped kids and then put more money in education. So I was really proud of it. We had a chamber conference. Sprint, one of the Jerry Carr's deal, he'd worked in West Africa, something like a Peace Corps, he and his wife, and he quoted a proverb that Hillary Clinton adopted. I heard it a lot over the years after that, but it was the first time I'd heard it was when I heard it from Jerry, and it takes a whole village to raise a child. And that's how I still see that as the way I see education, only the whole village is Kansas. It's not Lewisburg or Paola, it's Kansas. And that's what our Constitution says. So you've got to think about a kid in Pittsburgh or Southeast Kansas or out west as much as the kids in Blue Valley and the Johnson County. So I think that was probably the most, everybody that was involved on our side of the aisle loved that Children's Committee. They loved the idea that business should be involved as a future player on children's issues. I'm sort of sad because I think over the years it's been dismantled. School finance got bit out of shape. I mean, there really is a fundamental issue between our two parties in a lot of ways. And one is people who think less government is always better, let the parents do stuff. If the kids are hungry, it's the kids' fault. Society shouldn't get involved. And then the people who believe that government is a tool that can be used efficiently and smart, and it can make great differences, and we need to think of ourselves as helping the kids who aren't in next door or somewhere else in America. I mean, I care about a kid in Mississippi.
But Bob Miller is right there with you.
Bob Miller, I told you from the very beginning, he and I weren't too different on issues, and there were a ton of representatives around us on both sides that agreed with these. I got an editorial in the Salina paper, and it was really interesting because some people were upset because we were trying to do this kind of intervention. And the guy said, everybody says Barkis is a liberal, but he's not. He's a conservative, because conserving and dealing with our children is the best. It's a fundamental thing that a conservative ought to be for, I was happy to read it and think that is the way I see it. It is like I fought the highway program tooth and nail and killed it one year, and I killed it not because I didn't think Southeast Kansas ought to have highways or whatever. It's because I think highways, when you put money there and you don't put it in tech stuff at the University of Pittsburgh, if you don't put it in kids and capital, this isn't going to produce much. And I would honestly believe the reason Johnson County had the wealth that it's had is it had good schools. I think it's the best economic development tool we have.
How did you kind of see this relative to school finance? What surprised me when I went back, here school finance is really bubbling up, and in 91 it kind of falls apart, later gets resurrected. But you and Bob are off on
No, we had
children's
no.
agenda.
We had a list of things we were doing. We were doing reapportionment. That's usually we're taking 5 congressional districts and reducing it to 4. We're doing sentencing reform. First time we got it so that if you're a criminal in one place, you get about the same sentence as you get somewhere else. And we don't put nonviolent prisoners in penitentiaries that we can't afford. We put the most violent, and we let the other people have other kinds of things. That's a great thing in itself. When I look back on what we did, I'm amazed sometimes that it was like a Renaissance year. It was probably the most productive year that I know of it we've had, and it was unusual. And I think it was one of those oddities that come along. I don't think people really understood it from the outside. I don't think people have totally understood me from the outside sometimes, because I'm real strong on things I believe in, but I'm awful easygoing. And when I was speaker, every day I pretty much go down to the Coke machine on the first floor and sit there for an hour just talking to anybody that came by, because I want them to know I'm accessible to you. You don't have to be a lobbyist. You don't have to be someone who wants to advance a cause. And I don't have a bone with lobbyists, but you got to remember there's no free lunch. When you go out with somebody that wants to make you do what they want you to do, and they want to convince you or help you make decisions, they're still getting paid to advance that particular cause. We're there to speak for the people like children and old people, and really kids. Kids don't vote. Old people have a pretty strong voting record, and they get a lot of stuff at the table.
But you elevated this like a speaker rarely does. You name yourself chair. The minority leader is the vice chair. I don't recall that ever happening.
I don't know, but I know that it was really a super good project, and it worked really well for a lot of places. And it made me feel, looking back on this, it's hard to be speaker and then get beat to your next election. I did all these things, and maybe I didn't get enough information back home, but I also got swept over by the churches getting involved in politics in a way they have never been involved prior to that election. I could see, I was tired. Yeah.
Did you have, you've named some of the key people on the team that put together school finance. Was there a similar group, or was the children's initiatives it didn't get the kind of attention that school finance got?
Let's put it this way. I put people on there like Kathleen Sebelius and Joan Wagner and Republican women. And we had a committee that every one of the people on there, I believe, cared about the issue, personally. So it was not, I did what I always did. I looked for the best I could find to put in places where I could trust them. I always led like Genghis Khan. It's a management style that says, I'm not the boss, I'm the guy that comes and counts on. He swept through Europe on the basis of his pointing people under him and trusting them. He didn't try to micromanage. I didn't believe in, I'm not the only guy that's smart around here. I was one of the guys that could understand, if I let these people work, they will make me heroes. But we had lunch with Joan, and I guarantee you, after being at the Y and being the president, the leader there, she could not wait to get her teeth into these issues. This stuff, some of our things. One thing we did, that go back to the proverb, it takes a whole village to raise a child. Sprint made a movie for our use in that convention, and use on that topic. They pointed out the issues of the status of children. Kansas not so dang good at the time when you looked at the number of kids and how we compare, and it's probably worse today. We prided ourselves as a people of being all about helping each other and building community, and yet our kids didn't evidence that, because if at the same time you believe that, you don't want to put resources into it, you can't win.
Let me shift gears a bit.
Sure.
You talked about about how you and Bob Miller kind of connected. Did that just kind of happen when you were speaker? I mean, he was majority leader and you were, when did that start?
Bob and I didn't go out to dinner and hang out together. We were in two parties. We had our own kind of social things. But he reminded me, I said of George Teagarden, he was one of the best guys you run into, has the most integrity. I room with him. I talked to him a lot in running. First class farm rancher guys. And I find a lot of affinity in my mind with people who spend a lot of time on a tractor or in a field thinking. I remember Robin Leach, he was a dairy farmer. He'd get up at 4:30 in the morning, milk cows, and then come down here and make my life miserable. He would come up with more dang ideas than anyone. I had to go, what's Leach up to now? So I think that Bob and I, both his conservatism and mine, pretty well matched. I think our philosophy on some things would be real different. But this he didn't have to do this. He was willing to do it. He was interested. And I believe when you interview him, you will find him thinking it was something that he's proud to have accomplished.
Let's shift to Joan Finnick. Certainly that 91 session, it was kind of oil and water. How would you characterize working with Finnick?
I think the problem is that most people that come here, as she did, to accomplish something. I said she was a great campaigner. She was well loved by her family and friends, and she brought a lot to the table. She did, however, I find thinking in some ways she just didn't bring the knowledge, even though she'd been treasurer. She'd never been on this floor. She never really had to do the pushing and shoving that goes with making legislation. So you go in thinking it's easy. Donald Trump's got the same issues. He's basically not knowledgeable about how it works, and it's really difficult to get it to work if you don't understand it. So you get frustrated by it. We never knew, and honestly, we tried our best. I've sent people to talk to her that were from other, it wasn't just me, and I never hated her or anything. I just didn't always agree, and I was inclined, if I didn't agree, to not hide that. But I didn't walk out of there. I'm sure they got upset with us, but in my job over the years, I've had a lot of people awfully upset with me that were over not backing the right state chairman or not. This job, when you get into it, is not only about the legislature, it's about the governor, it's about the press, it's about the courts, it's about recruitment. It's about a lot of things that float around that I didn't know when I got the job, the minority leader, exactly what I was going to do with it. I learned.
I'm going to switch gears.
Well, I want to say on Joan Finney, I'll go back to say, she came in with ideas that she was going to be able to, because she was governor, say we're going to close every loophole and make a bunch of money, and we're going to solve problems with that, and then we're going to let the people have power. Initiative and referendum sounds great until you really think about California never could raise any money because they put a deal on the ballot to freeze their tax money, and that screwed up their education and mental health and a lot of things. So you got to be careful where you put the power, and I didn't personally think that the power should be out here. And if you're going to have a referendum initiative, I thought it should be limited to putting things that could go to the legislature, and maybe they had by a super majority, they'd pass it unless it was, blocked by a bigger minority. But we ran one out of here, and we got as many Democrat votes as you could.
Was the real break with her when the House Tax Committee just couldn't move her exemption idea on sales tax?
I think initiative from referendum, when you read the clippings about that period of time, was a bigger deal than that was the deal, that she was going to use her power to veto things to get that. we couldn't get it. It wasn't possible.
You couldn't get to two-thirds.
No, we couldn't get the.
Probably couldn't get many Republicans.
No, the Republicans actually took that away from us. We made a good faith effort. I think that helped. She finally realized at some point that she couldn't veto everything. But she didn't realize that we've been sitting here for years trying to get certain things out of the legislature that we couldn't get from the minority. But when we got the majority, lo and behold, the Senate actually could straighten up, or we would. I mean, the Senate, it was, I think it might have been an election year, but the Senate is like all other politicians. It's a little bit used to not liking heat. And so, there was a lot of years when the game up here was Senate versus House, and we'd say that when a House member went over to the Senate, they raised the IQ in both places or something.
You started almost, 40 years ago, and we've gone through some political turmoil, certainly in the last, since you served. There are a couple things that I'm kind of curious. You had mentioned earlier this rebel group may have been the first sign of this kind of free market, cut taxes, cut budgets.
They were for me. They were the first time.
Did you? I was involved with Mike Hayden. Mm-hmm. I don't recall the Kochs being involved in state politics at that time at all. I was wondering if you did. The Kochs, the Koch industry.
No, I met the Kochs. I even pitched them when I ran for Attorney General, and I have mixed feelings about them. I think they're very smart guys, got a real strong. We don't agree on philosophy, but that doesn't mean I don't respect them as having the right to be where they are and do what they do. We've had think about the John Birch Society history in Wichita and Kansas. I was majoring in economics and went down to Wichita with Wayne Angel, and he spoke to the people down there, and I came back thinking this stuff is radical too. It's real radical, and it's still kind of floating around. We have in this country a lot of this nativism and anti-government and
getting rid of the income tax. The Kochs allied themselves with that way back then.
Well, I was going to look for something. I may not find it, but I had something I was going to.
Well, let me shift gears. Another development that was going on was of course, the abortion issue. And I saw an article that, I think it was in '92, the legislature did pass an issue on abortion, kind of a compromise. Do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, basically it took away from the local cities the ability to put outrageous kind of decisions.
And
it was a compromise that we thought was well enough. It wasn't a win for one side or the other, but it was also like what we did on the other issues. This is going to be a rational, what can we do that we can agree on doing that doesn't make this a criminal offense and that doesn't allow the cities to get totally out of control. And like I said, I'm pro-choice. I have been pro-choice, and I'm pro-choice because I think if I were a woman, I'd want to make my own decision. I find myself going like my dad as a farmer. They were independent. They don't want somebody to tell them what books to read, what church to go to, what to do with a baby. And we'd had 2 miscarriages, my wife and I, and we had to really deal with the issues of this with our doctor. But I felt that way before. I don't want abortions. I wish every kid was born to someone who would love them and not create trouble for them. But I was there when it was close to the end of the back door. You slip around, get your girlfriend some money, and the people were doing abortions in awful settings. But I like I said, Bill Reardon and I didn't agree on that, but we worked together
Did you see the political emergence of this? I mean, gaining.
I always knew that, like gun control, abortion is a kind of a almost single issue for a lot of people. That's what one of the drivers for Trump to have his Supreme Court was to get another justice on the abortion issue. And people have the right to have single issues they want to stand for. I think when you get here, you're standing for the people of Kansas. I don't think it's it shouldn't be a litmus test for a Democrat to run for something. I know some people will disagree, but I will tell you, when it came push to shove, I spoke, I was there. I had people walking along chanting, hey, hey, ho, ho, Speaker Barkis has got to go, and I did, and I knew going there that it could happen, but I didn't want to be here to not speak up for the things I care about. I mean,
Now, are you talking about a particular event?
It was an event in Wichita that was put on, that was at the park, and it was during the Operation Rescue time, and it was I put my money where my mind, and you can tell from talking to me, I'm willing to negotiate on lots of things because I think there's not exactly right answers, but somehow that touches a real, I just don't like people to tell me what to do. That's why I became an attorney. It's why I don't work for a big law firm. It's why I don't work it didn't go into business, and Vance Packard talked about the corporate man and all I just don't take well to being told what to do. So that's just the way I am.
How did your caucus divide on that?
Oh, I'd say that a number of Democrats, and I found a lot of Catholic Democrats. Some of the best legislators I've ever known have been Catholics because they have the ethics of, I liked working with nuns because they were all about helping the kids that were here, and they were anti-death penalty. I mean, it's inconsistent in some ways. Somebody's pro the death penalty and against abortion. I mean, to me, it's a religious full theology, and people ought to think about it and figure out what they think about this stuff. But I'm an attorney. I know the gray areas of the world. I have dealt in gray area for most of my life. I think I was really good at this job because I'm interested in everything, and I had really good people skills. I spend my whole life dealing with people. I mean, that's what I do. I don't deal with long-term big lawsuits. I deal with people that are hurting. Their kid's been killed in an accident. They've got a marriage falling apart. I mean, that's where my life has been. So I feel like a priest. I had a chance to see the human condition. And I tell people, if I could write really well, I could write a great American novel in Paola, Kansas, because the world comes through there. Humans are kind of the same. I always believed the way I got here was in part reasoning from small to large. My office, kids are in trouble. Teachers are not getting paid. We're losing good teachers. Something needs to be done. It's not a perfect world in Paola, Kansas. And from that, I came here and reasoned, how can we do something about it? And to me, to say, well, a family ought to take care of their kids. Well, they ought to meet some of the families I met in my legal aid and later years. They're not taking care of the kids, but does that mean a kid doesn't have a right to have a decent chance in life? And so I've always reasoned from little to big, and sometimes by reading a lot of stuff, I reason from big to little. I mean, you can read books and get good educations about stuff.
Well, you've gone on to something that I wanted to spend a little time on, and that's just leadership skills. You got to see a number of House speakers before you became Speaker. I mean, worked with them while they were Speaker. Senate leadership, 3 governors. Did your leadership skills comes from Ottawa University council president, student council president, or where did who did you?
That's a good question, but I mean, I was a smart kid, went to a church college. After not coming out of high school, I was just glad to get on and find out what's coming next in life. But what I found out was I was the guy that the girls that were coming to Ottawa were interested in, because I didn't smoke and I didn't drink and I was a good Baptist kid. I can't tell you that I feel like my mother was really a heavy-duty church person. My dad went along, was raised doing Baptist Youth Fellowship, raised in a lot of religious stuff, and in that process, and at Ottawa University, I believe the 10th commandment became important to me, and I have lived my life as an attorney trying to follow that, dealing with people. I've tried to help people. If they don't have money, I help them. I try to do the things that help. I mean, I've given good advice and saved marriages and had things that I did that I believe came out of the same thing that made me who I am as a potential leader. But I also think I like people. I like to talk. I like, when I travel around the world, my wife and I had all kinds of great adventures. People would invite us to their home in the middle of Africa, or, you know, just thing after thing. And it was because I was from Kansas, and people didn't know anybody from Kansas in some of the places we were from, but they were interested. And I'm a farm guy, and I could talk to the Muslim guys in Marrakesh and go out to their home and find out, hey, they're kind of like us, you know. The real truth was, as I traveled in a third-class train through India, we found people that were really good, and the trains are packed, and they treated us respectfully. And I think if you can see the other person's, have empathy for other people, and if you're a reading changed my life. I mean, I think the books I read, I'm kind of like Abraham Lincoln. You get one of the unsung heroes that was talked about in this meeting I went to the other night was a teacher that he was a preacher and a teacher, and Abraham Lincoln was a forlorn young guy that had nothing going for him. His mom had died. His stepmother was a decent person, but he was in a very, very restricted place. And this guy loaned him books, gave him books. So when President Lincoln was on the way to be inaugurated, supposedly he stopped at this guy's house to thank him for having put him on the path to what he was on. And I mean, I love Abraham Lincoln because to me, he changed the world with the Gettysburg Address. He changed the Constitution. He came out, he's the American story, and they're all over the place. Immigration, I don't even have a clue why we've gotten to where we don't see America as an exceptional place, a democracy as exceptional. Our Constitution is exceptional. Everything that's happening cuts against what Daniel Borstein said was important, and if we lose it, we're in trouble, and it takes away from community. And when you take away from community and you break it up, we lose all the value that we get from having community. And we get, you know, I mean, look at the countries where they don't let women do anything. They lose half the possibilities because of that. We are a great country. I love being an American, but I am worried about it. And I think you can watch this society fall apart like other places. I once decided to read really smart books, and I read a book by Marcus Aurelius, and it made me think. He said, you know, the great leaders of the past, the great heroes, all that's left of them is occasionally a monument in the sand, something that says something, and maybe there's inscriptions, but they're dead and gone. And he was one of the most powerful men on the planet. And he was a stoic, and he was believed in civic duty, and slept on skins and on the floor. And I happened to be in California at the Getty Museum, and the day I was there, they had a room, and it had one statue in it because he was noted for working on rehabbing statues, and it's supposedly the only statue of Marcus Aurelius. And things like that affect you. And I had somewhere around here, you talked about leadership skills. I think I lost my little notes, so I can't seem to find it, but I had a whole set of things, that I found to be useful in terms of what I did as a leader, and that was to not take yourself too seriously. Bring everybody along. Trust your committee chairman. Don't second guess them. Don't try to be the smartest guy in the room. Try to take the responsibility for getting the smartest people to work with each other. Group dynamics was really good. I led like women lead, where you build committees and you work together. I came here at a time that before that, there was speakers would speak and people did stuff. You didn't have an input as a committee chairman hardly. Basically, the speaker was the head of the military, and he was it. I came along at a time when the real facts were you couldn't tell. The first time I'm minority leader, I come down here to the mic, to the seat. I think, well, I got to do something about roll call votes. I don't really understand them exactly, but I raise my hand. You got to have 10 hands. I raise my hand. I look around. There's not another hand up. I said, well, there's so much for being the leader. So then I went back and I said, from now on, I'm going to tell you, I'm not raising my hand until there's 10 other hands up back there, because I'm not going to be embarrassed again. And from that to... You
said that in a caucus?
I did. I told them. We changed the rules. The other thing, I'll tell you some other stories about being speaker. There's a red phone up there. I don't know what the heck the red phone's for. Nobody's giving me any advice, so I look at the phone and I pick it up and it goes, Capitol Security. Well, that's good to know. So then, first month
Did you learn on the job?
Yeah, I did. First time I ever sat in that seat up there, I'd never been in it. I never asked any of the previous Republican leaders, I'd like to chair the caucus for a day. I just wasn't going to do it, so I didn't. And so I'm up there, and first time I'm looking at this red lights all around here and white lights, and oh, this is great. They got their name. I won't have any trouble at all. I'll just go, well, that's Bill Reardon, and he's voted red. That's fine. Next step, you have the right to change your vote on a roll call vote. Now I realize I don't know the names of 40% or so of the Republicans. I can't remember the name of half the Democrats because I just blank on it or stress, and I barely got through that first morning with 2 or 3 people changed their votes. Fortunately, it wasn't a big group. So after that, I had a person on each side of me from my staff, and their job was to make dang sure that I knew who it was that raised their hand. I mean, it was... So we don't have any rules for how to do this. Unfortunately, Carlin didn't tell us anything. We haven't had any history. We're playing it by ear. We're working up things in the back. One of the representatives comes over and he says, well, why don't you use the book? I go, what book? Well, in the back of a drawer here, way back at the back, is a book that speakers have been using for years. It had everything in it it was like a Bible for how to run the... God, it was just like... They never
shared the book?
No, nobody shared the book with you, or anybody.
It sounds like you were learning on the job. There wasn't anybody you borrowed from, particularly.
Not really, and I learned one thing about leadership that you wouldn't think of, but every day before the session was over, generally, I would wander up and down the aisles and I would speak to everybody on my side of the aisle. When I'm speaker and I've got the power, one of the common questions is, when are we going to break for lunch? That was important. You found most people weren't listening to what the debate was. They were just having a... But I felt like I was a little bit like a shepherd with sheep, and you scratch their neck, you farm, how you deal with your 4-H gift and stuff. It's not analogous, but it's like they are respected, and every person here, got elected, and they should be respected, even if they don't understand what's going on at the moment. And I did that, and I put One of the things I did, I was proud of, I put Herman Dillon as speaker, as the chairman of the Transportation Committee. And Herman, after he'd done that, he went back and got a high school equivalency degree, but he was a chairman of, he'd been a truck driver, and he was a chairman of the committee where these big companies wouldn't let him in the front door of their business, and he did a good job. But I was proud of the fact that that's what you can do in a democracy.
Well, let me, we're getting,
All
I
right.
think, toward the end of my notes at least. You finish the 92 session.
Yeah, I
A
want to
dramatic set of accomplishments.
I'm listening, I'm just,
School finance is reshaped, and you say it's been bounced around. I look at it and I think the basic structure is what it was in 92. And the children's initiatives got changed in different ways, but there's still some significant things going on. And you've named other issues. All of a sudden, you're running for re-election.
well,
What happened? You know,
the guy that had a high school
What
education.
happened?
He was a high school graduate. He was a carpet layer. He went to every church, did communion at the Catholic Church and the fundamentalist churches, and churches got involved in a way that I couldn't get that kind of help from volunteer few Democrats and this, that, and the other. Part of it was, I'm not claiming it was all about that, but there was a wave of change, and I think what we found was I was a kind of a indicator of what was coming. And even though people, you know, there were other people that got defeated, and all of a sudden, churches really got into the game. I mean, Jerry Falwell, the moral majority. I would have probably won, even despite all that, had Ross Perot not gotten back in. He dropped out of the race and then he got back in, and when he got back into the presidential race that year, there were probably 1,200 new registered voters, and any of those new people did not vote for an incumbent of anywhere. They were all, it was like a taste of the future, but it killed me, and I didn't lose by very many votes, but that piece, and he dropped out, and then he decided to get back in, and there were people with sheets hanging them off of overpasses, and I mean, and I couldn't get enough information out to offset it. I really think that it was.
Did you see it coming? Did you sense?
We had been thinking there was going to be something like that, but yeah, I don't know. I would have been, you know, here I am, the most powerful guy ever from my county in the legislature, and I'm getting knocked off. But it happened after that quite a bit in the next few years, and I think it's happening today.
I always said 94 was a really turning point. I mean, the Democrats lost 14 seats in 94, not as many in 92. You mentioned two things, Perot, I mean, the abortion issue and Perot. You didn't mention school finance.
School finance should have been a winner for me.
So
If our schools made out good. They had property tax relief. It was a good.
that wasn't a negative in your.
Not at all.
In your point.
But I wanted to, before we stopped, I had talked about this book, but I think it's something I just got from my local town. Lewisburg has a community book every year, and this is the book, and it was written, it's called Life in a Jar, the Irena Sendler Project. It's based on a true story. Started in a little high school in Bourbon County, Unionville, I believe it is, and the three girls got involved in a history project. They ended up writing a play called Life in a Jar. They won the state historical contest. They went to Washington. In the process, over the next, they started giving this in synagogues and churches and whatever for a while. They eventually found the lady. She was 90 years old. She lived in Poland. She truly was an unsung hero. She saved 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. This book talks about those girls meeting her several times. She was 90 when they met her. She was an unknown person in Warsaw, in Poland, because when the communists came in, they didn't let any of this happen. They just put a clamp on heroes from Poland, and so nobody really knew about her. These girls did this play. They got national news on it. They did all kinds of things and went to Poland. They were national news there. They were treated like, they're 16-year-old kids. She basically became a mother kind of, or grandmother kind of figure. The teacher went over with him. He was a really great guy. It's a story about a good teacher, good kids, can change the world. This lady ended up being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because of their involvement. She ended up being named the #1 citizen of Poland. She ended up being named in Israel for her, because she truly took babies, and the story, Life in a Jar, is she promised the parents, if you let me have your kid and I'll save their life and I will keep a record as best I can of where that kid come from, so they won't be unaware that they're Jewish and that you're their parents. And probably 500, 700 of them actually connected as they grew up, because some of this stuff disappeared. But she put the names and the stuff in a jar and buried it in a yard behind where she lived, across from a Nazi military deal. And I had read a lot about that part of the world in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's the only place where the Jews really took on and fought to the point the Nazis wiped that. There were 400,000 people there towards the beginning of the war, and by the end there were no people there. They died in Treblinka, they died in Auschwitz, which I visited with my daughter. My wife took my sons there because I think you ought to remember that. And I'm very, very angry at our president for even implying that people associated with that movement, that time, are good people doing a good thing, because I don't feel that way at all. You think that we killed 50 people in Las Vegas, it's terrible. Try killing orphans walking down the street. Try reading that book, and the heart of it. Our book club's conservative and liberal guys. They're kind of, a lot of them never read books till they retired and whatever, and every one of us last week when we were reading this book felt moved by it. So I'd recommend this Life in a Jar for Kansans to read. I think it's great that my town has had the high school kids read it.
Convinced me my little book club should take it up.
Well, that's really how I was going to end. I did want to end on talking about Daniel Borstein, and you think about reading him, because he's speaking in I've got it was in Parade magazine, and it was the greatest danger we face. And it's basically dividing ourselves up and forgetting that we were built on community, people coming together to build things. And we've got the greatest Constitution. If we don't do that, if we go the way we're tending right now, I wonder if democracy will be here. I would also suggest Atlantic Monthly 2 weeks ago had a short article about the guys that founded the Atlantic Monthly, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Oliver Wendell Holmes. A group of men came together because they believed that America had was an exceptional country. And it was exceptional because of the Constitution, because people came here and had a real opportunity, because you weren't judged by the history of your family or where you were, your religion. And so they're worried about it. I'm worried about it, but I'm getting old, so, I just challenge the next generation to do something better.
With that, Thank you.
Well, thank
Marvin
you. I
Barkis,
really appreciate it. It was fun to talk again, and
Speaker of the House, 91, 92.
thanks.